Now we can begin. Welcome to community sadhana practice. We're reading in the Yoga Sutras from book 2. And we are talking about aversion today. So it's going through the different phases of, right, we started off with a sutra about the different ways that we can experience ignorance and all the different obstacles that can come up, or the kleshas, in your meditation practice. Yesterday we talked about attachment, and today we're talking about aversion. So aversion is that which follows identification with painful experiences. Attachment to pleasure, or raga, is another pain-bearing obstacle. We attach ourselves to pleasure because we expect happiness from it, forgetting that happiness is always in us as the true self. When we expect joy from outside things, we become attached to those things. If we find these things make us unhappy, we create an aversion towards them, dvesha. So raga, attachment or addiction, and dvesha, likes and dislikes, are impediments on the spiritual path. One we like because it seems to bring happiness. The other one we dislike because it seems to bring unhappiness. Everybody wants to be happy. Is there anything we can think of anyone that we can think of that does it? Even a small worm put in the sun immediately rolls towards the shade. If we put a plant indoors, it will slowly turn its face towards the light because it too wants to be happy. Happiness seems to be the basic need of everything in this world, yet rarely does anybody find it. Why? Because happiness is like the musk deer. The ancient scriptures have a fable about this animal which has a scented spot above its forehead that gives off the musk fragrance. This deer runs here and there in search of the scent, not knowing the scent comes from its own forehead. Just like that, happiness is already in us. Wherever we go, we reflect our happiness onto people and things. When we see a smiling face and feel happy, it is because the smiling face reflects our happiness. Just as a pure, clean mirror reflects our face beautifully, certain pure, clean faces reflect our happiness. Then we say, she gives me happiness. In other faces, our happiness reflects in a distorted way, and we say, I don't like that person. It's absolute nonsense. No one can ever give us happiness or unhappiness, but can only reflect or distort our own inner happiness. Swami Gyanasvara says that aversion is actually another form of attachment, and my teacher Raga says this too. He says that aversion and addiction are two sides of the same coin. They both cause as much difficulty and as many problems. It's something that we're trying to mentally push away, but that pushing away is also a form of connection, just as much as attachment is a way of pulling towards us. So aversion is really just another form of attachment. Aversion is a natural part of the mind. Dvesha actually seems to be a part of the whole universal process as we build this precarious mental balance between the many attractions and the many aversions. And it's almost like being stuck in a boat where you're being thrown here and there. Right? Every wave is pushing you from side to side when we're sort of being pulled, like, I want this, I don't want that. I want this, I don't want that. And it's like people can't find steadiness when we're just existing in this more shallow experience of I like and I don't like. Aversion is both subtle and, like I said, it's like the shallow part of the water. Like if you dive deep into the ocean during a storm, it's a lot less shaky. So the yogis are telling us that we should always be trying to dive deep. And another problem with aversion is you may notice an emotional response, right? If you have an experience that you don't like and you perceive that you don't like this person, this thing, this place, every time there's the anticipation that you may experience it again, it may bring up anger, irritation, anxiety, and it could be a mild or strong experience of that emotion. And these kinds of responses, which animate through the sensations of the physical body, it can cause us all kinds of trouble. I've read before that we hold our issues in our tissues. So if we're really existing in this plane of aversion on a daily basis, and we're drumming up all these negative emotions on a daily basis, it starts to break down our entire system. It starts to cause pain and discomfort. So it behooves us to try to deal with the mind. Because if we don't deal with the mind, we're never going to be able to get under the waves to go deeper. It's like it's the barrier that we need to transcend. We do that by attenuating the colors, which is the next sutra. So the attenuating process means becoming fully aware of the kleshas, fully aware of the thought patterns and whether or not they are neutral or are colored by addiction or aversion. And we slowly, through the meditation practice, start to break the alliance between these thought patterns and how they bond us, how they bring us into bondage, how they cause additional cycles of karma to happen. And that's in the next sutra. Should I keep reading? Yeah? Okay. So the next one is 2-9. Clinging to life, flowing by its own potency due to past experience, exists even in the wise. The next obstacle is the clinging to life. Abhinivesha. Here we can get a clue to the nature of rebirth also. Many Westerners don't believe in reincarnation. They feel it's all over once we die. But the yoga philosophy reminds us that all our knowledge comes through experience. Without experience, we cannot understand or learn anything. Even books can only remind us of something we have experienced in the past. They help kindle a fire that is already in us. That fire must be there first for the kindling stick to kindle it. For example, have you ever experienced a sapodilla fruit? It is abundant in Bombay in certain seasons, and it's very soft and tasty. But even if I spend 3 hours explaining a sapodilla fruit and how it tastes, you're not going to understand it because you've never experienced it. Knowledge comes only through experience. If you allow a baby to crawl on a tabletop, as it comes to the edge and it is about to fall, it will yell. Why? Out of fear of falling and dying. How can fear of death come into the mind of a baby? He can only fear death if he has died before. Some might say that's just instinct. But what does instinct mean? Yoga says instinct is a trace of an old experience that has been repeated many times and the impressions have sunk down to the bottom of the mental lake. Although they go down, they aren't completely erased. Don't think you ever forget anything. All experiences are stored in the chittam. And when the proper atmosphere is created, they come to the surface again. When we do something several times, it forms a habit. Continue with that habit for a long time and it becomes our character. Continue with that character and eventually, perhaps in another life, it comes up as instinct. Many of you may play the guitar. When you first learned, you might have even marked the notes right on the guitar to get the proper finger position. Each time you played, you checked to see which string should be manipulated. But after a few months, you became proficient and could even talk to somebody and play at the same time without looking or thinking about it. How? The experience became a habit. And eventually the habit became your character. Probably in another birth, you might easily pick up guitar playing without much effort. Don't people say, oh, she's a born guitarist? In the same way, all of our instincts were once experiences. That's why the fear of death exists. We have died hundreds and thousands of times. We know well the pang of death. And so the moment we get into a body, we love it so much that we are afraid to leave it and go forward because we have a sentimental attachment to it. Some people have old cars, say a 43 Dodge. Even if you offer them the latest model Dodge, they wouldn't want it. You may even say, your car is no good anymore. You're blocking the road by driving it at 10 miles an hour when everybody else is going 55. You need to get a new one. The motor vehicles department may even take it away by force and throw it in the junkyard. But the owner will sit by it, crying and lamenting. Attachment to the body is like attachment to that car. God's government regulations say that if your old body is taken away by force, they must give you a new one. Many people do not know this and cling to the body even when it gets old and dilapidated. That constant clinging, breaking away, clinging again, breaking away is why we are mortally afraid of death. It is another klesha based on ignorance of our true nature. So all these kleshas, whether dormant, feeble, intercepted, or sustained, should slowly be gotten rid of. Only then are we ready to go further into the deeper practices of yoga. So Swami Gurusvara says, even for those people who are learned, there is an ever-flowing, firm, established love for continuation and a fear of cessation or death of these various colored modifications. We have a way of wanting to protect our false identities, and we spend a lot of time building up identities, which we spoke about in previous discussions. Like our ego creates identity so we can exist in the world, but then we get mistaken and we place those identities as the forefront of who we are, and it causes an immense amount of suffering. So when we do this, we want it to continue to exist, so we protect it by all means. And once the ignorance or veiling of your true nature has happened and the individuality, asmita, has arisen, along with the association with seemingly countless attractions and aversions, there's a natural urge to protect that precarious balance of the false identities. I mean, this is why there are religious wars. Even if you study religion extensively, you find that at the bottom of all the teachings of all these religions are exactly the same thing. But they've created such an identity around truth that it creates a false separation where they feel like I have to protect the identity we've created. What we've done is right and what you've done is wrong. And they fight with each other over it. And that's like the bigger picture of society on an individual level in relationship. This causes trouble all the time. If you insult me, you're insulting my false identity, and I have to protect that. So I may create conflict with you, right? All of the best marriage therapists are going to tell you, stop looking at your partner to change yourself. That's like rule number one. Everything you see in your partner is really just a reflection of what's going on in you. And every irritation, every aversion, every addiction that you're projecting onto them, you're spending all this mental energy and anguish trying to protect what you've created, not realizing that you can damage what you have because you're not existing as truth, which is the two of you are sacred spirit souls coming together on this path in this wild material universe. And when you can get down to that place of like, how do I deal with myself? How do I get to the center of myself and meet the other person as center of self? It creates a peace in relationship with others. It starts to create a peace in relationship with yourself. And there's a gentleness that happens from it. There's less of a warring with everybody because we're not always trying to protect the false identity. So once the false identity has been created, Swami Gurusvara says that there are two things that can happen. We have a love for continuation, right? The false identity is so strongly held onto, even if it's just a phantom, even if it's not true, right? Even if it's just perceived to be me. Like if I had like some nasty brother growing up and he kept telling me my whole life, oh, you're so stupid, right? Even if I was a genius, it would permeate my subconscious. And what the Vedas say is, it's easy to break a twig, but when you put a bunch of twigs together and you try to break it, it's pretty hard to break. So the impressions, some scars are like that. if someone tells you something once about who you are, maybe it's a kind of an easy false identity to break. But if somebody keeps telling you over and over and over and over and over again, and it's an influential person in your life, you might tack it on to your false identity. Like, oh, this is part of my personality. I am stupid. Even if you're super genius, right? And then you don't take the advanced class. You don't read because you're stupid, right? You don't go to college because you're stupid. And you almost like create a whole life around the false identity. It's like we limit ourselves with the ideas that we shellac onto who we think we are. It's like the pure, beautiful consciousness at the bottom is constantly being plastered over with all these ideas of who we're supposed to be that society tells us, of who we're supposed to be that, you know, even our parents can tell us. And often the parents are placing their own false identity onto their children, and it just creates this endless cycle of suffering. So the yogis say, who's going to stop the cycle? Can it be you, right? How do we deal with ourselves? And the second part is a fear of discontinuation. So any perceived threat to the false identities is taken to be the threat of secession or death, right? It's not just dying in the physical body. You can literally react to somebody insulting you like they're trying to kill you, right? You get the same fight or flight reaction. But the yogis teach that the yogis shouldn't take insult or compliment so seriously, because they're both just distractions on the path. They're both just commentary on something that you are not. So you have to kind of let those things go in order to come into your full experience as the self. And nobody is exempt from this. It's common for yogis and spiritual truth seekers to fall into the trap of thinking that if I intellectually study this and I understand this from reading books, you know, I'm doing it. I'm there, it's sufficient. And this is particularly true in relation to a lot of the practices described in the Yoga Sutras, where one can do endless analysis and debate of all the sutras, right? But intellectual understanding is no protection in relation to these colorings when they actually come up for you, right? When that natural fear arises in you in relation to your inevitable demise. So there's a need for an uncoloring of the thoughts. Right? A thought is colored if it comes into your mind during meditation, or it comes into your mind in your life existence, and it brings up a very visceral reaction, really deep emotions, really like real anger, real forceful emotions that come up. And it's almost like we can't pull our mind back to the self, because the emotion comes up and we get caught in the web of it. And you might get stuck in that thought for hours. Have you ever had an argument with somebody, and then for like days after, you're like, oh, I should have said that. I should have said that. I didn't say that, right? Like ways we could have protected our false identity. It consumes us to the point where maybe like your lover is trying to like communicate with you, but you can't be present with them because you're just thinking about this other thing. It causes an immense amount of suffering to get stuck in the colored thoughts. An uncolored thought would be something neutral that came through your mind that you don't have an addiction or an aversion to. And what we're trying to do by attenuating the thoughts, which is what Patanjali is often talking about, is we get way down into the subconscious and we find the root of the thought. When did it start? What caused it in the first place? You know, where did I hear it, or where did I experience it? We come fully into understanding with it, like this deep, compassionate, loving understanding and recognition that it's just another false construct. And through that deep understanding, you know, the kind of vijnana, understanding a knowing without knowing, understanding, not a knowing in your mind, but a knowing through real deep truth, it starts to attenuate. It loosens its hold on you. It doesn't mean that you become an unfeeling robot. You still feel, you still have emotions, but they don't stifle you anymore. They don't flatten you for weeks or years of your life. So there's a freedom that happens. And there's this abundant creativity that blossoms forward when we get to these places where we can uncolor the thoughts. And you'll uncolor a bunch of them, and then you'll notice something happens in your life, and there's some like real subtle stuff under there that you didn't deal with. Right? You think you've made it, and then, oh, there's a little bit more really subtle seeds that have been planted. And they could be from this lifetime, it could be from your youth that you don't even remember. It could be from the yogis say previous lifetimes that you don't remember. So we really have to do our work to come to our meditation practice daily and these contemplation practices daily. They really help us to burn away all that is not real in us. So once we create a balance between the many addictions, the many aversions, along with having the foundational I-ness and spiritual ignorance, there comes an innate desire to keep things just the way they are. We don't want to lose that delicate balance. We get this fear of change, this deep fear of change. And I'm sure a lot of people are observing that now in their experience when everything had to change, right? Your job had to change, your relationships had to change all overnight. And it's been very traumatizing for people because it wasn't expected, and we naturally have a fear of that. So it's causing a lot of difficulties for people, because it's not just the death of the physical body, it's the death of the way we expected things to be. So even if you feel like you have no fear, you'll take that spider and put it outside, you'll jump off the cliff, you'll go bungee jumping, you'll jump out of the plane, there may still be a subtle fear that rises up when you sit down with yourself. I have friends who are like, they're fearless. They'll climb the highest mountain. They'll do all this crazy stuff, but they just can't sit and meditate. They can't just, right there. That's scary to them, to just have to be with the whole identity wrapped up in itself. It's a scary thing for a lot of people. And it's a natural thing to be fearful, to dive into those deeper places of yourself, because you will have to essentially kill a part of you. Well, what you think is a part of you that's not really a part of you. And that can be horrifying. But on the other side of it, there's a deep freedom. Like whenever I lead teacher trainings, right in the middle, right, they get all this information that's really just blowing their minds. It's blowing up their worldview of what they thought things were, and they realize there's a truth to all of it. And in that moment of having to kind of let go of the identity that they're holding on to that's causing them so much suffering, it's like what he's talking about with the car. It's like the car, that false identity it needs to die. It's really destroying your whole life, you know, like this addiction is just destroying your whole life. Like if you ask a crack addict, you know, do you want some crack? They're gonna be like, yeah, I want some crack. This is something my teacher teaches. Always cracks. You know, you say, but you lost your whole family over it. You know, you can't see your kids anymore. No, I want some crack. Give me some crack. You say, but you're homeless now. You had to give up your job and your house, and you have nowhere to live now. No, give me some crack. It's like we lay beside that broken car, you know, lamenting and mourning its loss when it was destroying everything for us. So the yogi, this natural non-attachment that arises through the practices, gives us the strength to start to let those things go that are no longer serving us. That's what the yogis mean. They don't mean, like some people teach this, but they don't mean like, oh, is your spouse pissing you off in quarantine? You should get divorced. He's not serving you. Right? He's not pleasing you. That's not what it means. It means let go of the false identities that are no longer serving you, that are damaging your relationship with your spouse in quarantine, if that makes sense, or your mother in quarantine, or whoever you're quarantined with, or yourself in quarantine, right? We have to let parts of us die in order to become who we truly are. And that's all through meditation. So whenever people come to me with questions about life and questions about, you know, what should I do for this and what should I do for that, my answer is always, oh, you should start a meditation practice. You should meditate. You know, I get yogis who are like, how can I get really advanced at yoga? You know, they take a really advanced asana class with me, and they're like, I want to be able to do the handstands and the splits like everybody else in class. How do I get really, really advanced? So you should meditate. Those are the advanced practices of yoga. I know people who could do crazy things with their bodies, and they're just huge assholes when they walk off the mat. They're missing the whole point. They're so entrenched in their false identities that it causes them to war with everyone outside of themselves. They say, oh, you should meditate. You should, come take some philosophy classes. This is advanced yoga. This is advanced yoga, listening and hearing every day. Waking up at 7:30 in the morning, right? Everybody could be sleeping in, but we're choosing this harder thing to do, to die to ourselves. We're waking up at 7:30 in the morning to die to ourselves, essentially. It seems crazy. But something else my teacher says is sometimes things that are spiritually correct don't make any material sense. And once you're really connected to spirit, they make full, complete sense. But we have to take a leap of faith, a bit of trust, to realize that these people who left us all this information, these yogis, they're trying to help us. They're giving us a roadmap to get through all the difficulties in life. Okay. What is, Micheline, you can unmute everybody. What are your thoughts on this, you guys?
I think that's what it worked out to be. Yeah, I zoomed in.
Can't hear you.
Yeah.
I have a quick question.
Okay.
I have several questions this morning. When it comes to attachments and aversion, right? In our relationships, like I always equate raga and desva to relationships, right? So there's attachment and detachment in our relationships. If we have an unhealthy attachment, or what if we're attached to something that brings up a lot of pain rather than averting it, what is that called? Is that still raga?
That was the other one that we were talking about yesterday, where we mistake what's painful for
Right.
It's a form of ignorance.
That's a Veda.
Yeah, it's a form of ignorance.
Yeah. Okay. And my second question is, what do the sutras say? Because we talk about past life and past life affliction. It might just be a past life affliction. But then what do we say to women, or the experience of prenatal and when the baby is in the womb and kind of taking on whatever mom is kind of going through? What is that? Do they talk about that at all?
Yeah, they talk about that in Ayurveda, especially. There's a huge, that's such an interesting topic. I mean, they say that at the moment you're dragged into the body that you get due to the constitutional nature and what's in the mind of the parents at the moment of conception. It's not as simple as that, though, right? It's like all the karma that you've accumulated over your last lifetime, and what was in the mind at the moment of death drags you into the next life. So it'll drag you into your new body and your new family. That's why the yogis are saying, like, you are not just preparing to live, you are preparing to die. Like, you have to be so on top of your thought process that at the moment of death, you can control what's in your mind. So they'll say you have to, like, you'll have people around you chanting mantra, and you're internally chanting mantra because you want to be absorbed with divinity at the moment of passing. And they say that's what pulls you out of the cycle of rebirth and death, but then you want to come back in anyway to reconnect and be able to love. It's like this whole cyclical process. So they say that in the womb, that there's this, it's like you're not disconnected from your mother. You're essentially sharing a body as she builds you a car, is how we could say. And whatever comes through the senses of the mother gets placed as samskara into the child. And if we look at this from like a Western view, They've done studies where if a mother is in a warlike situation or an abusive situation, the child's nervous system develops differently, where they come out prepped to be in that difficult situation. So they're more prone towards anxiety than a mother who was like in a very peaceful environment in her pregnancy. So that child usually comes out less prone towards anxiety. Their nervous system and their brain is a little different, which is crazy.
Right.
So in Ayurveda, they say that the pregnant woman is like a pot of oil that's filled to the brim, and you can't let a single drop out. You have to be so delicate with a pregnant woman. And it's so different in our culture. Oh my gosh. It's so different. You know, I felt like I had to keep pulling away when I was pregnant from people, because everybody would come up to me and tell me like their horror stories. They would see I was pregnant and they'd be like, oh, let me tell you all the horrible things that happened to me when I was giving birth pregnant.
Right.
I had to pull away. I was like, there were, you know, people who would like scream at me when I was pregnant. And it was just like, I would just be like, oh, okay, you know, and just like pull away. And because I knew this information that you have to stay calm. Like it's a really big responsibility carrying another person, because you're essentially, it's like two souls in one body. It's incredible. So it's what creates the body. It's, let me remember, it's 1/4 the karma that the child brings in. It's 1/4 the DNA that's coming from the parents. And then, see, I'm forgetting now, but 1/4 of it is what the mother is imbibing. So not just what the mother is eating, but what the mother is seeing and what the mother is listening to. So like I would play mantra all the time for the baby. I would play mantra, I would listen to spiritual texts. I would try to, you know, imbue her with happy thoughts. If I found myself going on a negative mental stream, which is pretty easy when you're throwing up and suffering and having a hard time, you know, I would like try to distract myself and pull myself into, you know, something else. And that's, you know, essentially, you know, usually in Ayurvedic culture, you have a lot of people around you taking care of you when you're pregnant. It's like the most delicate time. And then postpartum is super delicate too, because those first impressions for the baby of the first year of life, it's it creates so many samskaras. I think they say for the first 3 years of life in particular, it creates an incredible amount of samskaras, everything they see, everything they hear. So you're supposed to be very careful as a parent too. But in our culture, we're like, you know, we're overdrawn. Parents don't have a lot of support now. So it's like you put them in front of the TV and like all this stuff is going into their subconscious mind. You don't even know half the time what's going into their subconscious mind, and it's programming them and creating impressions, right? So if we can try to be really careful about that, then we'll change the experience of future generations.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. That's an interesting question.
So can I ask a question?
Sure.
Okay, so as an adult now, depending on the circumstances that your mother or your, you know, the environment that you were, are whatever we may attach to or whatever may trigger us doesn't necessarily mean that it's something that we probably had experienced in our past life, but it's probably something that was conditioned from the womb.
See, it's more complicated than that, because you picked that circumstance to be conditioned.
Okay.
Like, because they say like whatever you were absorbed in at the time of death is what dragged you into your new body and new circumstances. So like people want to blame their parents for a lot, right? I mean, that's just, all of us naturally do that. Like, it's my mother's fault that I'm like this, or it's my father's fault I married this guy, you know? But it's our fault because we, you know, and I know there's like this whole thing now about like, I don't want to be politically incorrect when I speak. I'm just going to speak from what the yogis teach. They say that you did pick the circumstances that you're in. It doesn't mean you deserve to be abused. It doesn't mean that you should stay in bad circumstances. It just is a simple thing that they say that you picked it. It's like if I have an impression that I love cake, I'm always going to be attracted to cake. someone's gonna have some cake and I'm gonna like, gravitate. Like if I'm at a party and I see some cake, and this is like real for me, I really love cake. If I see some cake on the table, I'm gonna just like, kind of like inch out of my conversation with someone and be like, oh, okay, I'll be right back. Like I need a piece before everybody else eats it. Like I'm gonna go towards the table, towards the cake. And it's like that with the people that we're attracting. You're gonna find when you do these spiritual practices, you don't even have to push people out of your life anymore that aren't serving you. It's like the energetic signature won't match anymore, and you'll just naturally separate. Like the universe will come in and kind of sweep them away. And it doesn't mean that we should be passive, especially, again, I'm going to reiterate, like if someone's abusing you in any capacity, emotionally, physically, you by all means should extract yourself from that situation. Something that we teach is giving the association and taking the association of someone. So if you can hang with people and they're doing bad things, things that are not so great, and you could be with them and not take their association, like you don't let that stuff seep into you, then it's fine to stay around them. And as you get further along the path, you're going to find that you're going to be more unperturbed by other people's unsavory actions. Like if someone's super nasty to you or freaks out on you or what, it's not going to perturb you to the point where you can't be around them anymore. You'll still be able to have compassion, see them as a spirit soul. But up until that point, by all means, if you're taking their association, if they're influencing you in a negative way, if you can't get past it yet, you haven't done the work, you're not ready yet, it's okay to say, I'm taking a break from this relationship for now. And you might find that you're able to return to it later if you still have karma with that person. But generally, like especially when we teach about the chakra system, the chakra system is an energetic flow or river that sort of like circulates throughout the body. There are 72,000 vayus, which are these energetic rivers, and chakras are where they sort of convene. And from that energy grows the physical body. And this is sort of like the richest question. We usually think like the energy is inside the body and, the body creates the energy, but the yogis teach us the opposite, where your physical body grows from the energetic body. You shed the physical body as you move into a new life, the yogis teach, but you drag the energy body with you. So whatever energetic work you've done in previous lives, you're going to bring into the new life, and it's going to grow the vehicle, and it's going to attract the vehicle according to the parents that are going to create that vehicle for you. And that vehicle is going to have a certain energetic implication where you're going to be attracted to other people with similar energetic signatures as you. And it's funny because like a chakra imbalance might show up in two seemingly opposite ways, but you actually have the same problem. For example, like if you're so attracted to this person, you're so in love with this person, but they're so emotionally, distant. They're not willing to commit. And you're actually like codependent and you want them to be with you and like you can only consume your mind in them. How often do we hear this story all the time? It's the same heart chakra imbalance. One is overactive and one is underactive. They come to each other and they look at each other and they judge each other and they say, what's wrong with you? There's something wrong with you. You're imbalanced. You don't want to commit. But the other person's like, you're too clingy. And meanwhile, like you're attracted to each other because you have the same problem. So that whole idea with like marriage therapy where they're like, look at yourself. So once we start doing that and we start seeing all the different ways that in relationship it's not that anything's wrong with those people. It's like magnets are opposite poles. So they come together, right? It's a way that we're trying to balance each other. It's like, if you can either use it as a way to suffer a lot or you can use it as a way to heal. Our relationships are meant to heal us, not harm us. But we're so lost in the sauce, in our culture. Like there's no wisdom or knowledge surrounding this. Like unless you're a therapist and you've studied this stuff extensively, people don't know what to do. They just want to love. It's their natural inclination to love, but they're having so much trouble loving anybody because they're not realizing that the love is not from them. The love comes from inside of you once the circumstances are correct. And the circumstances we can make correct on our own. And then when you can exist in that unconditional love, your relationships are going to be more beautiful. Right? Your relationships are going to cause less suffering for you and your partner, and both of you will experience radical healing. So it's a really lovely thing when it's usually not a lovely thing.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anyone else has thoughts on that? I think that's a big topic that everyone has a lot of thoughts on.
I was thinking, so due to the spiritual growth, that's why I'm okay. So let me try to think this properly. So if there's a family, right, and there's a total of 5, and everyone is experiencing their own experience, but it's really based off of whatever they probably brought on, the experiences that they had in the past is a different outcome for them now. So like, say for instance, I'm just using myself as an example. I'm very completely different from in a traumatic, abusive, childhood growth than my sister. And my sister, it's like 2 complete different, she's still stuck on that, but I probably can process things a lot more at ease because of the spiritual growth that I probably had carried on from my last past lives. That's a possible chance.
Yeah, everyone perceives things differently. Different constitutions, everyone perceives things differently, and everybody experiences things differently. Yeah, so it could be from a past life. It could be just from the circumstances when you were younger. It could be from the work that you've done. I mean, they usually say, like, if you're very attracted to yoga, then you probably were doing it for a lot of lifetimes beforehand.
Oh, that's so interesting.
And it's why when you're it's not just because it's truth that it feels like, oh yeah, that makes sense. There's also like an aspect of the teacher is teaching you to remember what you already know, what you've already learned, because we bring that layer of the mind with us into the next body too.
So death and rebirth is more easy for the cycle of life for now. For me, I feel like
the more work, the easier it gets. But I mean, that's if you're not associating with material, which is never easy.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for this conversation, everybody. Mission 6, we have to meditate now. So let's do a quick pranayama. We'll do some alternate nostril breathing, and then we'll sit for our meditation practice. So we'll take the right hand and fold the peace fingers into the center of the palm, closing off the nostril with the thumb and the ring finger with the left. We'll inhale deeply and exhale deeply. Closing off the right nostril, inhale. Closing off both and exhale. Inhale and exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale at the left side. We'll place the hands on the knees and close the eyes and come to our meditation. Bringing the hands to prayer, bowing the head. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you, Amanda. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much, everybody. We'll see you all tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you,
good day.
Amanda.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, tomorrow, can one of you host? I have training from 6 a.m. till right before I teach.
No problem.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a good class.
All right.